She looked me dead in the eye in front of everyone and said, "You were the last one in the room. Dad's wallet is gone. You tell me what that looks like." And just like that, at my own father's funeral, I became the suspect in a crime I didn't commit. Hi, my name's Jenna. I didn't plan on speaking out, but when someone tries to erase your dignity while pretending it's about family, silence isn't grace, it's surrender. And I wasn't about to let them write the ending for me. Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. People say funerals bring families together. Mine tore us apart. I hadn't been back to Savannah in nearly 2 years, not since Dad's heart started failing. The old oak trees still stretched their arms across the narrow streets, Spanish moss dangling like whispers caught in time. The sun that day was gentle, filtered through thin clouds, as if it knew not to shine too brightly, and yet inside me everything burned cold. The church was quiet except for the soft shuffle of shoes and occasional coughs, those awkward sounds people make when they don't know what to say. I sat 3 pews back, alone. Elaine had made sure of that when she claimed the front with her husband and kids, flanked by Mom like a queen holding court. She didn't even glance at me when I walked in, just stared straight ahead, her hands folded, lips pursed like she was preparing for a photo. I kept my chin up, but I felt the weight of eyes on me. Not cruel, necessarily, just curious. Like I was a visitor in my own family. I'd expected the distance. What I didn't expect was how hollow the place felt without Dad's voice anchoring the room. His laugh had a way of softening even the sharpest corners. Now, without it, everything felt sharper. After the service, we moved to the house, the one we grew up in. 3 bedrooms, creaky floors, the smell of lemon polish and old carpets. It used to feel warm. Now it felt like a museum curated by Elaine, her fingerprints on every centerpiece, every fake floral arrangement. The dining table was draped in white linen, topped with tea sandwiches and lemonade pitchers. I poured myself a glass just to have something to hold. Elaine moved among the guests like a practiced hostess, laughing softly, patting arms, clasping hands with the performative grief of someone who'd rehearsed her role. When she finally approached me, it was with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "I didn't think you'd make it," she said. "Neither did you," I replied, my voice steady. She blinked but didn't respond, just turned to greet a family friend behind me. The exchange lasted seconds, but it left a film of discomfort on my skin, like dust that wouldn't shake off. I slipped away into the hallway. The study door was closed. I thought of Dad's worn armchair, the way he used to tuck his wallet into the inner pocket of his corduroy blazer. He always kept it in the same spot, predictable, like clockwork. I used to tease him about it. "Someone'll lift it one day," I said once. "They'd have to catch me first." He grinned, patting the jacket. I touched the doorknob but didn't turn it. I didn't belong in that room anymore. Back in the living room, Mom stood near the fireplace with a glass of wine, swirling it absently. Her posture was stiff, lips thin, eyes scanning without really seeing. "She's upstairs now," someone whispered behind me. "Yeah, I saw her near the suit." I turned. 2 cousins I barely knew hushed themselves when our eyes met. I offered a polite nod, but my stomach clenched. Something was off. Then Corinne, Mom, raised her voice, just enough for people to hear. Some folks really shouldn't be left alone in private spaces, not today of all days. My breath caught. She didn't look at me directly, but the message was clear. I glanced around. Several heads turned in my direction. A few eyes dropped quickly when I met them. Elaine stood by the staircase, arms crossed. "I told you," she said loudly. "I left everything in place. Dad's suit was laid out, ready. The wallet was right there on the desk." The room fell quiet. I opened my mouth, unsure of what I was about to say, but she continued, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You were the only one up there, Jenna." She walked closer, step by step, her heels tapping like accusations. You were alone in the study. Dad's wallet is gone. You tell me what that looks like. A murmur ran through the room. Someone coughed. Another shifted on their feet. My heart pounded, not from guilt, but from the sheer absurdity, the injustice. But more than that, the familiarity. This wasn't the first time Elaine had spun a narrative where I played the villain. I looked at Mom. Her expression was unreadable. No defense, no protest. Not even Dylan, who stood by the window with a plate of food, made a move. He just looked away. I forced myself to stay calm. Are you serious right now? You think Elaine raised her hand. I'm not thinking. I'm stating facts. I felt the floor shift beneath me, not literally, but in the way trust disappears. Fast, quiet, final. I scanned the faces around me. Not one person stepped forward. Not one person said, "That's not who she is." Maybe they didn't believe it, or maybe they didn't care. That's when I knew. I was alone in that room, even surrounded by people who shared my blood. And for the first time, I stopped waiting to be rescued. It's funny how quickly suspicion becomes memory when no one bothers to ask for proof. By the time the last car pulled out of the driveway and the lights dimmed in the living room, I was already upstairs. I hadn't even finished my glass of lemonade. I just left it sitting on the side table, untouched. My feet carried me to the guest room like they'd walked that path too many times before. I closed the door behind me gently, like it might wake something in the walls if I slammed it. The lavender sachet Mom kept in the top drawer still gave the room that perfumed calm, but tonight it smelled more like disguise than peace. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the creased quilt cover. My hands stayed folded in my lap, too tired to shake, too stunned to do anything but breathe. My fingers twitched like they wanted to ball into fists, but I didn't have the energy for that either. A memory surfaced before I could stop it. Dad handing me his wallet when I was 9. "I don't want anything fancy," he'd said, patting my shoulder. "Just something that says you know me." I had used his $20 bill to buy him a used copy of a Civil War biography. I wrapped it in blue paper and hid it under his pillow. The look on his face when he found it, that stayed with me longer than most birthdays, that same wallet. I wondered where it was now. There was a knock on the door. I didn't answer. It creaked open anyway. Mom stepped in, not bothering to look apologetic. "You should have just said sorry," she said, smoothing her cardigan as if brushing off lint. "Even if you didn't do it." I blinked slowly. "You want me to lie?" "I want peace, Jenna. This isn't about facts. It's about keeping the family intact." I let the silence stretch. She crossed her arms. "You've always made things harder than they had to be." I didn't argue. It wouldn't have mattered if I did. Instead, I looked at her and asked, "Do you think I did it?" She didn't flinch. "It's not about what I think. It's about what people feel." Then she turned and walked out. I stared at the door after it clicked shut, the shape of her absence heavier than her presence had been. Downstairs, the TV buzzed low. Dylan had taken over the recliner, a tumbler of bourbon resting on his stomach, remote perched on the armrest. I passed by once to get water. He didn't speak. Didn't ask how I was, just kept flipping through cable news like none of this touched him. In the dining room, 2 of Mom's friends whispered as they packed leftovers into plastic containers. One of them shot me a look, something between pity and suspicion. I nodded out of habit and left. Back upstairs, I lay in bed, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling as if it might crack open and explain why everything hurt more than it surprised me. Voices floated up from the kitchen below. I couldn't make out the words until one name cut through like ice water. Bernard. Aunt Marla. Elaine laughed, the sound brittle. "I'll call Bernard Fox first thing Monday, just to make sure everything's documented. You know how things get when people start feeling entitled." I sat up, my jaw clenched, my hands curled around the edge of the blanket. This wasn't about the wallet anymore. It was about control, narrative, assets, influence. Elaine wasn't just tightening her grip, she was carving me out of the picture before Dad's name even faded from the headstone. Later that night, I padded down the hallway to use the bathroom. As I passed the kitchen, I heard Mom's voice again, lower this time, but clear enough. She never really understood what family means. Then Elaine, softer. She always thought being related was optional, like she could dip in and out when it suited her. I stood in the dark hallway, the tile cold under my feet. My hand tightened around the doorknob. I didn't go in. I just waited for their words to float past me like secondhand smoke. Maybe they didn't know I was listening. Maybe they didn't care. Back in the room, I curled onto my side, not to sleep, but to shield myself from the world. I reached for my phone out of reflex, not to call anyone, just to scroll, to feel like someone, somewhere, knew a version of me that wasn't this one. I opened my team's group chat from work. Nothing heavy, just messages about schedules, spreadsheets, and a few harmless jokes. Then I saw it. Forwarded from someone named Leanne, a new hire in HR. The photo was from earlier that day. Me, standing in the hallway at the wake, caught mid-step, arms crossed, eyebrows raised. One of those moments that looks defensive even when it isn't. Underneath it, a caption. Stealing more than hearts, I see. I stared at the screen until the edges blurred. The photo wasn't the worst part. It was that someone saw what happened today and thought that was the punchline. You can only stay quiet so long before the silence turns into a scream. I woke before the sun cracked open the sky. Sleep had come in short, stuttering breaths. I laid there for a while, letting the early light crawl across the ceiling like slow-moving fog. The walls in this house still creaked in the same places, but they felt older now, strained, like they'd been holding their breath for too long. I got dressed in yesterday's jeans and an oversized cardigan I'd left in the car. It still smelled like mint gum and seatbelt sweat. I slipped out without anyone noticing, careful to close the door softly behind me. The Magnolia Griddle sat tucked between an antique bookstore and a tire shop on East Liberty. It was the kind of place you had to know about. Dad had taken me there growing up, just the two of us, when he needed a break from the chaos at home. It always smelled like fresh coffee and butter, and the booths had that crackled red vinyl that stuck to your thighs in the summer. Kent was working the early shift. I recognized him by his gait before I even saw his face. Slow and careful, like he carried too many trays in a past life and still felt them balancing on his back. He smiled when he saw me. Been a while. Yeah, I said, sliding into the corner booth near the window. Still do the cinnamon pancakes? He scribbled on his pad, then poured me a mug of coffee. Your dad used to order those. Every single time. I wrapped my hands around the cup, letting the warmth seep in. He brought me here before he told me he was retiring. Said the griddle was the only place he could think straight. Kent smiled softly. He was a good man. Always tipped in cash, too. Said he didn't want the tax man snooping around his kindness. I let out a small laugh. That sounds about right. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Just a calendar reminder. Nothing urgent. But I opened my banking app anyway. Habit, I guess. Everything looked fine. No strange withdrawals, no surprises. Still, my gut didn't relax. Kent returned with the plate. 2 pancakes crisp on the edges, swimming in syrup. He set it down and leaned slightly on the edge of the table. You know, he said, I was surprised to see your sister here yesterday. I paused mid-cut. Elaine? He nodded. Came by with your mom just before the wake. Picked up your dad's order. Said they were getting something he liked for the family lunch. My fork hovered. Wait, she was here? Before the funeral? Yeah, I was on prep, but I saw her through the back. She was digging through one of those garment bags. Looked like she was checking something. I figured it was his suit. I sat back. She was digging through it? Kent nodded, then shrugged. Didn't think much of it. Figured it was family stuff. The buzz in my head sharpened. Dad's wallet. The accusation. Elaine's rehearsed outrage. She'd said the wallet was laid out with the suit, that she saw it last. I looked at Kent. "Hey, do you all have cameras here?" He blinked. "What?" "Security cameras around back in the alley near the delivery entrance." He scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, we had a break-in last spring. New manager installed a system. Why?" I tried to sound casual. "Just curious. You think they still keep footage?" Kent narrowed his eyes slightly but didn't press. "Maybe a few days. Depends if the drive's full. Why?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "Could you check it, just in case?" He studied me for a beat. "Sure, I'll ask the manager. Come back tomorrow?" I nodded. "Thanks. And Kent?" "Yeah? Don't mention this to anyone." He zipped his lips and nodded once before walking off to refill someone's decaf. The rest of the breakfast tasted like cardboard, but I finished it anyway. Something about the ritual helped me stay grounded. I tipped him in cash, like Dad did. Back in the car, I sat behind the wheel with the engine off. My fingers hovered over my phone for a full minute before I opened my texts. There was only one person I could message. One person who knew how to dig into things without asking too many questions. Julian Carter. I hadn't texted him in over a year. The last message was from him. "Take care, Jenna." I typed slowly. "I need a favor. I think they're trying to bury me." I stared at the screen, hovered over send, then tapped it before I could change my mind. The reply came 5 minutes later. "Send me the details. I've got you." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle like a blanket over a bruise. I didn't know if the camera saw anything, but I'd stopped waiting for someone to save me. It was time I saved myself. The truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers from a shaky camera feed. Julian's office hadn't changed much since the last time I was here. Same navy blue walls, same bookshelf with case files arranged more like memories than reference material. A jar of pens still sat lopsided near the printer, and the leather couch by the window still gave off that faint scent of worn optimism and coffee. It was, somehow, both professional and deeply human. He greeted me with a small nod, no questions about why I hadn't texted in a year or why I looked like I hadn't slept. That was the thing about Julian. He never rushed to fill silence. He just held it gently until I was ready. I handed him the thumb drive. Kent had given it to me that morning, tucked inside a folded napkin like we were passing state secrets. He hadn't asked why I wanted it, just said, "Hope it helps," and gave me a look that said he knew it might. Julian plugged it into his laptop without a word. The file loaded slowly, the preview screen flickering as the footage adjusted. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, staring at the screen like it owed me something. The video showed the alley behind the Magnolia Griddle. The timestamp read 9:07 a.m., an hour before the service. A dark SUV pulled into frame, passenger door opening. That was Mom. She stepped out slowly, then Elaine followed. Her outfit matched what she wore at the wake: black blouse, silver earrings, hair pinned back with too much care for grief. She popped the trunk. Julian paused the feed. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded once. He pressed play. Elaine reached into the back, unzipped a garment bag, and pulled out what looked like Dad's jacket. She turned her back to the camera but didn't step out of frame. A few seconds later, her hand reached into the inside pocket. She pulled something out, small, rectangular. Then she slipped it into her purse. My stomach tightened. She zipped the bag, pressed down the suit jacket, and closed the trunk like nothing happened. It was fast, smooth, like muscle memory. Julian exhaled quietly. "Well, that's not nothing." "It's not proof," I said, trying to temper the hope rising in my chest, "but it's something." He nodded. "Solid circumstantial leverage. Not enough to press charges, but enough to raise questions, especially if she claimed you were the last one with the suit." "She did," I said. "She made a whole show of it." Julian clicked around the footage, confirmed the timestamp. "And you were in the house during this time?" "Yes, I arrived just after 9:30. Mom met me inside." He leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head. "Then this is usable. Not in court, but in negotiation. Estate matters hinge on perception just as much as legality." He turned to me, serious now. "You need to talk to the lawyer. Bernard Fox, right?" I nodded. Julian handed me the drive. "Be calm. Be clear. Don't accuse. Just raise concern. Trust me. He'll watch the footage." I stared at the little silver stick in my hand like it held the keys to something buried. Before I left his office, I stopped by the hallway window and looked down at the sidewalk. It was just Charleston on a Thursday, people with umbrellas and tote bags, a kid eating a pretzel. But it looked different, like the world was tilting back towards something I could stand on. On the walk to my car, I called Bernard's office. His assistant picked up, all politeness and careful scheduling. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Fox about a concern regarding the estate process," I said, keeping my tone measured. "Nothing dramatic. I just want to make sure everything's transparent before the reading." She told me Bernard had an opening the next day. I took it. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. I uploaded the footage to a private drive, created a backup link, and double-checked the timestamp. Then I opened my email to Elaine Walker. Subject: "You sure you want to do this?" No greeting, no explanation, just the video link and one line. "Let me know if you'd prefer to talk this through." I hovered for a second, then hit send. 10 minutes later, my screen lit up with a reply. Fine. That was it. No denial, no defense, just one word. Sharp, short, final. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat still, letting the silence stretch around me like armor. For the first time in days, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. People don't break your heart. They hand you the scissors and ask you to cut yourself out. The study hadn't changed much since I was a kid. Same deep green walls, same stiff leather chairs with arms that cracked when you sat down too fast. Dad used to read the newspaper in here every Sunday, one leg crossed over the other, his glasses slipping down his nose. Now, there was no newspaper, just stacks of manila folders and the heavy presence of unfinished business. Bernard Fox sat at the head of the table with a polished binder in front of him, his reading glasses perched halfway down his nose, like he wore them more for effect than necessity. He greeted us politely, then cleared his throat and adjusted his papers. Elaine sat to his right, hands folded tightly in her lap. Corinne flanked her, lips pressed together, gaze fixed somewhere just above the floor. Dylan leaned against the fireplace, arms crossed, eyes dull like he'd been dragged here instead of invited. I took a seat directly across from Bernard, silent, alert, not because I wanted drama, but because I was done being quiet. He began with the basics, date of the will, state of registration, formalities. Then his voice dropped slightly, smoothing into a tone meant to sound both kind and irreversible. Russell Walker designated his assets to be divided equally among his 3 children, he said. Jenna, Elaine, and Dylan Walker. No alternate percentages, no special conditions. A pause, just enough for Elaine to shift in her chair. However, Bernard continued, until the estate is settled and final disbursements are made, he named Elaine Walker as temporary executor, citing her proximity to the family property and availability during retirement planning. Elaine turned slightly toward me with a measured smile. I know the past week has been tense. I just want to say, I regret how things were handled at the wake. It was an emotional day. I let rumors cloud my judgment. I never should have said what I said. Corinne nodded approvingly beside her, as if Elaine had just solved something rather than confessed to nothing. I didn't speak. I let the silence fill the room, stretch across the furniture, wrap around our ankles. Bernard adjusted his collar. Before we continue, I'd like to note that under state law, if there is sufficient concern over potential misrepresentation by an executor, formal review can be requested prior to asset transfer. He looked at me then, directly. Do you have such a concern, Ms. Walker? I reached into my bag and pulled out the thumb drive. I held it between my fingers for a beat, not dramatically, just long enough for the weight of it to be noticed. For the record, I said, placing it on the table in front of Bernard. Elaine's smile faltered. Dylan straightened slightly, his arms unfolding. Bernard raised his brows but said nothing. He slid the drive toward him, made a note on his legal pad, then looked at us again. "May I ask what this pertains to?" "An inconsistency," I replied, "involving the personal effects of my father on the morning of his funeral." Elaine sucked in a quiet breath. "You're kidding." Dylan looked between us, then at Bernard. "Can I see it?" Bernard hesitated. "If it's relevant and the parties consent—" "I do," I said calmly. Elaine didn't respond, just stared at the folder in front of her like it might rewrite itself if she willed it hard enough. Bernard opened the file on his laptop, turned the screen slightly toward Dylan. We all watched in silence. The footage rolled slowly. Elaine at the back of the SUV unzipping the garment bag, her hand reaching in, the wallet slipping into her purse. The timestamp. Undeniable. Dylan stared at the screen. When it ended, he didn't say anything at first, just blinked slowly. Then, "You lied, Elaine. We all saw you." Elaine's head snapped toward him. "I didn't lie. I made a mistake. You called her a thief in front of everyone." Corinne leaned in, voice tight. She apologized. "We're not perfect, Dylan. It was grief." "No," he said, shaking his head. "That wasn't grief. That was planned." Corinne looked at me then, her face drawn. "You really had to bring this into a legal room? After everything we've been through?" I met her gaze. "You mean after everything you let happen?" The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. It sat between us like a verdict. Bernard cleared his throat. "Given this new material, I'll be pausing the execution of duties until legal review can be conducted. All estate actions are on hold." Elaine slammed the folder shut, the sound sharp against the wood. "You think this makes you right?" she snapped. "All it makes you is alone." I didn't flinch. I didn't rise. I just sat there, hands folded, feeling nothing like a winner. Because she wasn't wrong. I was alone. But at least now I was alone on my own terms. They wanted me to carry the shame. I chose to carry my suitcase. I don't remember locking the door behind me when I left the house. I remember the heaviness of my bag, the sound of my keys brushing against the zipper, the morning light pouring through the trees like a soft farewell. But the door? That part's blank. Maybe because I didn't need closure from it. Some doors don't deserve to be closed gently. Back in Charleston, my apartment greeted me like it always had. Quiet, sunlit, mine. The plants on the windowsill had survived in my absence, crooked but alive. I dropped my bag at the door and stood for a while in the center of the living room, listening to the hum of the fridge, the low traffic outside, the silence that didn't accuse me. I took off my coat and didn't hang it up. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and pulled up the family group thread. The last message was from Elaine, a forwarded meme about how families stick together no matter what. Sent the day before the reading, no words, just a cartoon house glued together with duct tape. I hovered over the thread for a moment, then hit leave group. No explanation, no send-off. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Later that afternoon, I played a voicemail that had come through while I was on the road. It was from Ramona, my mother's second cousin or something like that. We'd never been close, barely more than names at family functions, but her voice, when it came through my speakers, was clear, unapologetic. "Hey, Jenna, I doubt you remember me well, but I remember you. I saw what happened. I heard the whispering. You were brave. Thank you for not letting them silence you. You helped more than you know." I sat still for a long time after that. We live in a world that measures forgiveness in silence, but sometimes silence is just abandonment in disguise. Julian stopped by that evening. He didn't stay long, just dropped off a small envelope with the original thumb drive inside. "No loose ends," he said. We didn't talk about Elaine, or Bernard, or the frozen estate. We just stood by the door, and before he left, he looked at me and said, "You didn't just prove them wrong. You proved you were worth listening to." After he left, I made tea. Then I pulled out my old mic and opened my video app. My following wasn't large, just a few hundred people from a support group platform I'd joined years ago. We shared stories there, not for clicks, for clarity. I hit record. I used to think walking away meant giving up, that if you loved someone, you stayed, no matter how much it cost you. But I've learned something since then. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit the people you love hurt you, and leave anyway. I talked for about 10 minutes. No script, no plan, just truth. Not bitterness, not rage, just release. Before I logged off, I added one last line. If you've ever had to walk away from people who expected your silence as proof of loyalty, just know this: you are not alone, and you never were. I uploaded the video and went about my night, brushed my teeth, fed the cat, folded a load of laundry that had been sitting in the basket for a week. An hour later, I opened the app to check on it. The first comment read, "I went through the same. Thank you then." Another, and another. I didn't respond. Not yet. I just let them sit there like quiet echoes bouncing off walls that once felt too tight to breathe in. I walked out onto the balcony, the Charleston night warm and a little breezy. The city buzzed softly in the background, full of people I didn't know and stories I hadn't heard. But I felt part of something, even if it was just this small piece of peace. There was no big ending, no applause, just me, and silence. But this time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like home. Some silences feel like exile, but the one I carry now feels like peace. In walking away, I didn't lose a family. I reclaimed myself. Sometimes the ones closest to us ask for loyalty at the cost of our dignity. But love, real love, never demands silence in the face of hurt. As my father once said, don't fight over what you'll never take with you. What we carry forward should be kindness, not wounds. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever chosen yourself over the weight of someone else's expectation, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You're not alone. And maybe sharing your voice is the first step to finding peace, too.